Welcome to this deep dive. We're going to be exploring the global financial crisis. But we're going beyond just the U.S. experience. We're going to look at how it impacted the whole world.
It's really fascinating because we often just focus on the U.S. side of things, right?
Right.
But so many other countries were caught up in it. And, looking at how they reacted during the boom and then during the bust, it tells you a lot about their values and even, their vulnerabilities in a way.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And our guide for this journey is Michael Lewis's book, Boomerang. He takes us to places like Iceland, Greece, Ireland, and even Germany.
What I find really interesting is that Lewis, he doesn't just focus on the numbers and the dry economics. He really gets into the human stories,
Right.
the cultural quirks, the psychological factors, and
Mhm.
those details are where you really get those aha moments.
Yeah, you start to see the people behind the numbers.
Yeah.
So Lewis starts with this investor, Kyle Bass, who was one of the few people who actually predicted the subprime mortgage crisis in the U.S. And once he nailed that, he shifted his focus to the global meltdown.
Yeah.
And he even gave his own mother some pretty extreme advice: guns and gold.
Yeah, Bass. I mean, he saw the warning signs flashing all over the world, and he was convinced things were going to get much, much worse before they got better. Like buying $1 million worth of nickels.
Wow.
He actually did that
Wow.
because he believed the metal content would eventually be worth more than their face value. That's how bad he thought it was going to get.
That's a pretty extreme level of preparedness. And it makes you wonder if someone like that, a financial expert, felt that level of panic. How was anyone else supposed to know what to do?
That's a good point. I mean, it really highlights how this wasn't just like a financial event. It was societal. It was psychological. It was everything.
Absolutely. So let's move on to Iceland. This tiny little nation had huge GE financial ambitions in the early 2000s. And their banks grew at an astonishing rate. I mean, the fastest in history.
Yeah, their stock market went up ninefold, real estate prices tripled. On the surface, it seemed like a success story, but it was all built on this mountain of debt,
Yeah.
which, as we know, is not sustainable.
No, it's not. And when the crisis hit, Iceland's currency plummeted. Banks collapsed.
Yeah.
And the nation was just staring down financial ruin. Lewis talks about this eerie calm in Reykjavik during those early days of the crisis, like empty streets, abandoned construction projects, and bankers getting paid to do nothing.
It's wild. But here's the thing about Iceland. They'd reinvented themselves before. Like a century earlier, they went from being one of the poorest nations in Europe to one of the richest. And you want to know their secret?
Yeah, what was it? Cod.
Cod, fish.
Yeah.
They privatized fishing rights. So basically, they turned cod into a securitized asset.
Okay, so instead of overfishing, they actually
Right.
incentivized fishermen to manage the cod population sustainably.
Yeah, exactly. So fewer, but better fishermen, sustainable resource, tons of wealth.
Wow.
And that wealth, it fueled this cultural boom, art, education, even Bjork, right?
Interesting. But didn't you say a lot of those young, educated Icelanders didn't really want to be fishermen?
That's right. And this is where the financial crisis really forced them to confront their values. Like, had they abandoned their hard-won sustainability for the quick riches of high finance?
Yeah.
And was that really who they were as a nation?
It seems like easy money can tempt any nation to stray from its core values. So let's shift gears a bit. Let's head over to Greece.
Okay.
You've got this country steeped in ancient history,
Yeah.
but also wrestling with some very modern financial problems. They borrowed heavily, right? Hid the true extent of their debt, and it all just became unsustainable.
Yeah, and the public reaction was explosive, like riots in the streets.
Yeah.
And they were pointing fingers, blaming everyone else, especially the IMF in Germany, who were actually bailing them out.
It's interesting because Lewis makes this really fascinating comparison in the book. He contrasts this chaos in modern Greece with the serenity of Mount Athos. You've heard of that? This
Yeah.
monastic republic where time just seems to stand still.
It's amazing. It's like stepping back centuries.
Yeah.
And the monks there, they have this incredible sense of perspective on human nature.
Right. So you've got this juxtaposition, a society clinging to ancient traditions while refusing to take responsibility for their modern problems. And then you have these monks who seem to understand the consequences of our actions on a much deeper level.
Yeah, and there's this really symbolic act that Lewis talks about, the sale of Greek islands.
Right.
More than just a financial necessity, it was this loss of control, almost a desperate attempt to appease the very people they blamed for their problems.
It makes you wonder what happens to a nation's identity when they're forced to sell off pieces of themselves like that. So we've got Iceland seduced by easy money, Greece caught between its ancient past and a turbulent present. Let's move on to Ireland and see how they fared during the crisis.
Okay.
So Ireland was experiencing its own economic miracle, right? The Celtic tiger, they called it, transforming into a hub for tech and finance. But it was largely built on this foundation of real estate speculation, all fueled by easy credit.
And there was this economist, Morgan Kelly, who was sounding the alarm, comparing it to a Ponzi scheme. But nobody wanted to listen.
It seems like when a market's booming, people just tune out the warnings.
It's human nature, I guess. But when the Irish real estate bubble burst, it was devastating. Left the country worse off than it was during its poverty-stricken past. Lewis actually draws a parallel between Iceland's asshole capitalist architecture, those flashy buildings meant to showcase wealth,
Right.
to Ireland's ghost estates, vast developments of empty houses. It's eerie.
What is asshole capitalist architecture exactly?
Well, Lewis uses that term to describe this ostentatious style of building, like extravagant designs, no regard for practicality. It's like the buildings themselves are a boastful display of wealth and dominance.
Wow. So both Iceland and Ireland got caught up in this culture of excess and unsustainable growth.
Yeah.
How did the Irish react politically when it all came crashing down?
It's surprising. There wasn't this widespread anger like you saw with the Tea Party in the U.S. More like a sense of resignation, almost like they felt occupied by the foreign advisors now dictating their economic fate.
Yeah, and Lewis captures this feeling brilliantly in the story of Gary Keogh, this pensioner who meticulously planned to throw eggs at the AIB shareholder meeting.
Right.
AIB was one of the banks that got bailed out.
Oh, yeah.
And Keogh's story, it really embodies this frustration, but also this underlying sense of fair play that you find in Ireland.
Totally.
He throws his eggs, walks away calmly, and then gets on a Mediterranean cruise.
As planned.
Yeah.
Classic.
It's both funny and kind of heartbreaking at the same time. So we've got these different reactions: denial, blame, quiet resignation. But what about Germany?
Right.
They have this reputation for being fiscally conservative, responsible, right?
They do. Germany's known for their prudence, shaped by their history of hyperinflation and, the weight of their past. But even they weren't immune to this subprime mess.
That's surprising. How does a country so known for its financial discipline get caught up in something like that?
Well, to understand this, Lewis dives into the cultural psyche of Germany. He actually draws from this book by Alan Dundas called Life is Like a Chicken Coop Ladder, which explores this rather peculiar aspect of German culture, a fixation on bodily functions.
All right, now I'm intrigued. How does this tie into the financial crisis?
Well, Dundas argues that this fascination manifests in different ways. In their language, their humor, even their architecture. Like, take the Commerzbank skyscraper in Frankfurt. It has this glass-enclosed men's toilet at the top, seemingly designed to symbolically defecate on their rivals at Deutsche Bank.
Wow. That's quite a statement. Are you suggesting that this cultural quirk somehow contributed to their bankers' missteps during the crisis?
Not directly, but it points to a certain mindset. The German bankers, even the ones who lost billions, they weren't necessarily driven by the same kind of greed as some of their American counterparts. They were more like cogs in a machine, used to a system that values order, control, following directives.
So when the crisis hit with all its chaos and unpredictability, it shattered their expectations of how the system was supposed to work.
Exactly. The crisis exposed a vulnerability in their system, a blind spot in their otherwise meticulous approach to finance.
It's fascinating. We've gone from cod-fueled prosperity in Iceland to egg-throwing pensioners in Ireland to skyscraper toilets in Germany, and we haven't even touched on California yet. I'm really eager to see what insights Lewis uncovers there. Last time we were talking about how even Germany, with their reputation for financial discipline, got caught up in the global crisis. But let's shift gears now and head over to California. And this is where Meredith Whitney enters the picture, right? The analyst who first predicted the global crisis. But then she turns her attention to a different kind of picking time bomb: U.S. municipal debt.
Right. So after her global prediction, Whitney, she really zeroed in on the finances of a lot of American cities and states. And she made headlines. I mean, she even went on 60 Minutes and predicted this wave of defaults. And it caused quite a stir, even panic in some places.
But wasn't she right, though, about the underlying issues? I mean, a lot of states and cities were living way beyond their means, right?
Yeah.
They were spending more than they were taking in, masking their liabilities, basically just delaying the inevitable.
Oh, she was absolutely right about the structural problems. And Lewis uses California as this prime example of fiscal recklessness, a state with huge potential but constantly on the verge of disaster. And he shows how these same patterns of denial, overspending, short-term thinking that fueled the global crisis were also happening at the local level.
And it's into this chaotic scenario that Arnold Schwarzenegger steps in as governor, right? The action hero turned politician trying to bring some of his trademark optimism to a system that seemed totally broken.
Yeah, Schwarzenegger's story becomes this fascinating kind of microcosm of the bigger themes that Lewis is exploring in Boomerang, right? This larger-than-life figure used to overcoming any obstacle, but now he's confronted with a reality that even he can't just muscle his way through.
It's almost Shakespearean, isn't it? This clash between individual ambition and these just intractable forces of a broken system. Did Lewis offer any insights into how Schwarzenegger tried to tackle these problems?
Well, Lewis focuses on the city of Vallejo, which is north of San Francisco. It declared bankruptcy in 2008, and it became the stark example of how unsustainable financial decisions can have these devastating real-world consequences. And Vallejo's downfall was largely attributed to these overly generous public worker contracts, particularly for police officers and firefighters.
So Vallejo's situation seems like this microcosm of the larger crisis playing out across California and even the U.S. Can you elaborate on how these contracts contributed to the city's bankruptcy?
Sure. So Vallejo had essentially promised its public workers, especially the police and firefighters, compensation and benefits that they just couldn't afford in the long run. You know, they created this situation where a huge chunk of the city's budget was locked into these contracts, leaving very little room for anything else.
It sounds like a classic case of kicking the can down the road. Making promises they couldn't keep and hoping that somehow things would just magically work out. But eventually reality catches up, right?
Exactly. And Lewis paints this really vivid picture of the human cost of Vallejo's bankruptcy. City services were slashed, libraries closed, parks neglected, crime went up. There was this palpable sense of decline of a once thriving community now just struggling to survive.
Yeah. It's a stark reminder that financial decisions have very real consequences for people's lives. The impact goes way beyond just numbers on a balance sheet. Did Lewis explore how these cuts specifically affected the police and fire departments, given that their contracts were such a major factor in the bankruptcy?
Yeah, he actually goes into detail about the fire department. So before the bankruptcy, Vallejo had 11 fire stations for a population of about 120,000 people. Afterwards, they were down to 4 stations, operating with skeleton crews. And Lewis actually spent some time with the firefighters, writing along on calls, listening to their stories. They were exhausted, demoralized, working with outdated equipment.
It must have been incredibly frustrating for them, knowing that they were putting their lives on the line with inadequate resources because of these decisions made by others.
Absolutely. One captain described Vallejo as basically a training ground for rookie firefighters. They'd get a few years of experience in this high-pressure, under-resourced environment and then move on to better-funded departments.
So the city was essentially subsidizing the training of firefighters for other municipalities.
In a way, yeah. And this really highlights a critical aspect of the crisis. It wasn't just about bad financial decisions. It was about the erosion of trust, the breakdown of social contracts. When a city can't provide basic services, when its firefighters are stretched thin, its infrastructure crumbles, it creates this sense of disillusionment and despair.
Yeah, it's like a vicious cycle. A lack of resources leads to a decline in quality of life, which then makes it harder to attract residents and businesses that could help contribute to a solution.
Exactly. And this cycle raises these profound questions about our responsibilities to one another and the limits of self-interest in a society that's supposed to be built on shared values.
Vallejo's story is incredibly disheartening, but it really highlights the complexities and the human cost of this financial crisis. And if we zoom out and consider the broader context, what key takeaways can we glean from Vallejo's experience?
Well, I think Vallejo's story underscores that the patterns that led to the global financial crisis weren't confined to Wall Street or even national governments. They were playing out in our communities, often with these devastating consequences for ordinary people. And I think it's a reminder that we can't afford to be complacent. We need to be engaged citizens. We need to hold our leaders accountable and advocate for policies that prioritize long-term sustainability and shared prosperity.
I think that's an important message for our listeners. The financial crisis wasn't just some abstract event. It had very real effects on people's lives, and those effects are still being felt today. We've gone from the collapse of Iceland's banks to the haunting ghost estates of Ireland, from the peculiar architecture of Germany to the financial struggles of California. It's been quite a journey.
It really has. And, throughout it all, One theme keeps coming back to me, the human element. Our choices, our desires, even our blind spots, they all played a role in shaping this crisis.
Yeah. It's like the crisis was this giant stress test, right?
Mhm.
Revealing cracks, not just in our economic systems, but in our, I don't know, our collective psyche.
It definitely exposed a lot of uncomfortable truths about how we behave, especially when it comes to money and that allure of easy riches.
So this brings us to a pretty crucial question. Who's ultimately responsible for the financial crisis? I mean, is it fair to say that governments, institutions, and individuals all share a portion of the blame?
It's tempting to point fingers, right? To blame the greedy bankers or the incompetent politicians, but it's more complicated than that.
Right. There's always nuance.
Always. I mean, while individuals definitely made bad choices, they were often operating within systems that encouraged those very choices. Like, think about the mortgage brokers who pushed subprime loans on people who clearly couldn't afford them.
They were just playing the game as it was designed, chasing profits in a system that rewarded short-term gains over long-term stability.
Exactly. And the people at the top, the CEOs, the regulators, they were often so removed from the ground level that they didn't fully grasp the risks that were building up.
It's that old saying, right? The fish rots from the head.
Hmm.
But even within a flawed system, individuals still have to make choices.
They do. And that's where personal responsibility comes in. We as consumers played a role in this too.
You're talking about the people who took out those mortgages they knew they couldn't afford.
Yeah, but it's bigger than that. It's about our collective tendency to want more, to believe the good times will last forever, and to just ignore the warning signs until it's too late.
So it's not just about blame, it's about recognizing that we're all interconnected in this system and that our choices have consequences, ripple effects.
Exactly. It's a shared responsibility to be informed, to question assumptions, and to make choices that align with our values, not just our immediate desires.
This raises a pretty big question then. If the problem is systemic, if it's, I don't know, part of human nature, is there any hope of actually fixing it?
That's the real challenge, isn't it? You can't just regulate away human nature.
So are we destined to just repeat these cycles of boom and bust forever?
I wouldn't say we're doomed, but it requires a pretty fundamental shift in thinking, both individually and collectively.
What does that shift look like? What needs to change?
Well, first we have to acknowledge that this idea of endless economic growth, it's just not sustainable. It leads to overconsumption, depletion of resources, and eventually, crisis.
So we need to redefine what progress means, move away from just measuring success in terms of GDP and material wealth.
Exactly. We need a more holistic approach that values social well-being, environmental sustainability, long-term resilience.
It's like we need to, as a society, grow up a bit. Realize that happiness and progress aren't just about consuming more stuff.
I like that. Grow up. And that means shifting our values from this intense focus on individualism to a more communitarian ethic.
What would that look like in practice?
It means recognizing that our choices affect other people. It means taking responsibility for the well-being of our communities and the planet as a whole.
It's a pretty radical shift in thinking, isn't it?
It is radical. But it's also necessary if we want to avoid future crises and build a more just and sustainable world.
So with a challenge this big, what can our listeners do? How can they apply these ideas to their own lives?
It starts with awareness, educating yourself about these systemic forces and making conscious choices.
Like, can you give some concrete examples?
Sure. It could be supporting local businesses, investing in renewable energy, reducing your consumption.
So voting with your wallet, making ethical choices, being mindful of your impact.
Exactly. But it goes beyond individual actions, too. Get involved in your community. Advocate for policies that promote sustainability and justice. Hold your leaders accountable.
This deep dive has been really insightful. It seems like the financial crisis wasn't just a wake-up call about our economic systems, but about ourselves. About human nature.
It was. It reminded us of our capacity for both incredible things and for self-destruction. The choices we make now, they're going to determine what kind of future we build. Will it be based on endless growth or on cooperation, sustainability, and a deeper understanding of how connected we all are?
That's a powerful question to leave our listeners with, a real challenge to consider. Thank you for guiding us through this deep dive. It's been a pleasure.
It's been my pleasure as well. And remember, this journey of understanding and positive change, it doesn't end here. Keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep pushing for a better world.
That brings us to the end of our deep dive. Until next time, stay curious.